Hey, Mike, big fan. Love all your work. Fantastic. I've been recently reading Wilhelm Reich, character analysis, sexuality and anxiety. In regard to sexual gratification, from the Wilhelm Reich perspective, he says that it is pretty much the final key issue to curing neurosis, but it is very difficult to gratify oneself. And he believes in pornography and all that and being open, and I concur with that, but what would you recommend in the case of, since I wrote well proliferate with so many neurotics, excluding the organ therapy, to curing neurosis without having relations with other neurotics?
Interesting question. Thank you for the call.
Well, I hope I got the question right. He's asking me what do I recommend other than orgone teachings within a sort of a Reichian context that might help with neurosis and things like that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you see, here we're into an area that is really a very, very important topic for me. And I think there also has to be great caution with any kind of roadmap. What I mean by that is that it's important that people do not try to get into an A to Z type of way, like somebody setting themselves up as an expert to tell another person what that will entail. This is, I think, been one of the problems of the past, and I don't think it's right. If we were to just talk, sort of loosely, I might say, as I've done on various occasions, oh, you should get into the work of, Alexander Lowen and look into bioenergetics, or, hey, why don't you, go over and read Arno Gruen or R.D. Lang, And of course we can reference, and I try to do that in my professional work on the blog, forum, and in the sources, and I don't mind doing that to a certain extent by saying, oh, you have an interest here? Check out this, or check out some more of Wilhelm Reich's lesser-known works like Listen, Little Man, or The Mass Psychology of, Fascism, or whatever, and continue the studies. But when it comes to individuals asking seeking personal advice, I'm against that. I'm not picking you out, per se here. We're just talking, so I'm not singling you out or anything like that. I am just a person who really strongly believes that each individual must make that journey on their own. They must find out what works for them, because I am extremely against any kind of sort of A to Z kind of mapping, so in other words, you might take a piece from somebody else that you say, hey, that worked for them, or they recommend it, but I'm very much against that in a way, because it's very, very collectivist, and therefore I'm not a collectivist, so therefore it must be that you must find your own unique way, because remember, the way out of neurosis, first of all, is to see it as neurosis. I've always spoken about deconstruction. In order to solve the problem, you must get all the false things out of the way. In order to see the self, which is, in fact, you can't see it until you're first familiar with all the things that are not the self. You've got to study the mind in totality, and that might lead you then into Jungianism, or into Freudianism, or even into Blavatsky, or into occultism, or into Wilhelm Reich, or goodness knows where it will lead. You see, and that person then, it's the road that they're traveling is absolutely unique and independent. I can't insist upon this more, because it actually has a very strong metaphysical basis, because as a matter of fact, when you finally arrive at your so-called solution or revelation, it is not so much the ending and the gaining of the insight at the end that is important. In fact, you might even go so far as to say that the ending that you arrive at is entirely based on the steps that you've taken to get to that road. And this is what I always try to make clear, because we are so goal-oriented. We drag all our bad behavior and all our bad lessons into this world of psychological development, and also into the world of the occult. I like what Erich Fromm said. Erich Fromm talked about mutability and doing basically what I'm saying, which is carve your own road out, because in fact the goal at which you arrive will be based on those 360 steps you took as you travel through the cycle, you see. So the ending is in the journey. And therefore, if the journey is in some way illegitimate or inauthentic or collectivist or whatever language you want to use, you see that in the end will create another form of neurosis. Because the way things are in the world and the way the mind works is the mind is a very bizarre thing. It's like you try to throw a net, to use a metaphor, you try to throw a net over the mind to try and solve one of its problems or rope it in or say, I've got a piece of it now. And do you know what happens? Like some weird, chameleon circuit. The mind becomes the net you've thrown on it. This thing is really the trickster. You see, so in a way we've got to be very careful. And therefore, this serpentine mind that we have is pretty ambivalent. It's a very amazing adversary in one way. And therefore, one of the things I've isolated that causes a lot of problems is this collectivism. And when you go to a teacher who's written a book or has a particular ideology or philosophy, there's a tendency to not realize that teacher, and remember, a lot of these teachers may not even say what I'm saying, and therefore you adopt their theories or you adopt their philosophies because it's, again, a part of the mind that needs handrails. Your interest in that subject might be, and again, I'm not singling you out or anything like that, I'm just saying that a person's interest in a particular study might be based on the fact that they're inwardly weak, that they're inwardly scared of taking the journey themselves. And therefore, I'm worried then that the step that a person takes, you see, will lead them to another form of neurosis. Because it's like Chinese dolls. You may escape from one level of neurosis only to inherit another, even more pernicious form. You see, in other words, another metaphor is that we might strangle ourselves in the very web we're trying to release ourselves from. By every motion that you make, you can further entrap yourself. So the way to get out of it is actually quite difficult. And ultimately, in the movie Dune, for instance, at the end, when they're really trying to negotiate the desert at the end, and they're in deadly peril, Frank Herbert gives you a piece of monumentally important information. And the character says to his mother, walk without rhythm, so you won't alert the worm. Now this contains, like many of these movies do, and people don't even notice it, an incredibly important piece of information. Walking without rhythm means walk with no pattern, walk with no accepted school. And of course, as I said before, I come from the Krishnamurti teachings, and they say, carve your own path out. Now, if on that road of discovery, you need to end up reading, I don't care what it is, Anton Blinken LaVey, if it comes to that. I don't know where that journey's going to take you. Neither do you. That's the beauty. You put your faith in your higher self, and you go along the journey wherever it's going to take you. And that will make of you what you are. The sword has to go through the fire. There are no shortcuts. And there will be many guides, and there will be many deceivers. And there's no way, really, to stop that from happening, because we're dealing here, ultimately, with our own minds. And therefore, everything we learn from everybody else, every other teacher we may admire, is ultimately a reflection of something about ourselves. We wouldn't even be coming to that person. We wouldn't even be interested in that doctrine, unless something within ourselves was leading us there. It's almost like, are you playing the guitar, or is the guitar playing you? Is the music playing you, or are you playing it? And as you go very deeply into this journey, sometimes those lines become very ambivalent, because there is a higher self. I do believe there is a higher self, and that higher self guides us. And therefore, in our world today, there's been so much institutionalization and territorialization of knowledge. And I think this is the problem. So, indirectly, it answers your question, because the first thing to do is see that there is a neurosis. And the way out of it is to study that neurosis. Study all those forms of anti-truth. Study all those forms of pseudo-love. Study all those forms of pseudo-reality until you're almost sick of it. Until you're so familiar with it, like a forensic detective hunting some maniac. Right? That serial killer, that creep, looks out his window, and there in the pissing rain, there he is. There he is, Popeye Doyle, eating his burger, looking up at your window in howling storms. He's awake. You got to become like that. You got to become like that. You got to be on the trail of the predator from morning till night, every waking moment. Let nothing else be more important. Nothing. Become completely. First of all, don't follow the tiger thinking it's going to lead you out of the woods. And secondly, become absolutely up to speed on the nature of your predator, or the nature of that which you're seeking. Become completely knowledgeable about it. This goes in wartime. We know that the generals had the picture of their adversary right on their desks or right on the wall above them. We know that the greatest detectives have the minds of criminals. Why is that? Because it's almost like a yin-yang thing. You're going to end up having to become so knowledgeable about your adversary in order to unlock the secret, or find out why this thing came into being in the first place. I've said it in other works in different ways in which I said you have to embrace the shadow. This is what I mean by doing shadow work. Instead of projecting a face of fear into the unconscious, you project something different, because you're going to meet in reality, or you're going to meet in your psyche, exactly the kind of consciousness that you project into it. This is the way that mysteries are. And therefore the person who enters into any kind of mystery, be it inward mystery or not external mystery, everything they do on that journey is going to be predicated upon the kind of intent that they have. Intention is absolutely everything. And that is what it's all about. So if you then have a complete sense of determination and also optimism and the right kind of attitude, then amazing things will come to you. But the mind tricks us into wanting those revelations to be collective in some way. Oh, I've had this wonderful experience, now I'm going to write about it and share it with the world. Or, is this experience I'm having, can my girlfriend get it too? You know, we're already packaging it. Do you know how rare it is in this world to have a personal experience or relationship with something? One-to-one, just yourself alone, without being contaminated by what mummy and daddy and everybody else, you know. So everybody is everyone. We even have billboards now talking about this collective claptrap. The social hive is becoming almost ubiquitous. It's almost like there's nothing personal anymore. But you see, the thing that we love about the beautiful creations of the Wilhelm Reichs and the Ezra Pounds and the Rilkes and the musicians is that it's completely unique. You wouldn't have had that thing without them doing it. That's what makes a Segovia attractive, or a particular artist, you see, that we like their work or whatever. And we even talk about filmmakers having a certain style. So that's what I'm talking about. It's really not that esoteric. It's like, what is your own style? What is your own flavor? What is your own understanding? Every institution in the world is working on the mind of the child to condition it to think like other people. And to have everything secondhand and everything borrowed. So, on your journey, you might find that it's Wilhelm Reich is your guide, you know, or Ayn Rand, or whoever. And therefore, that's part of your treasure trove. That's part of your interest. And whether or not other people get it or not, or whether other people are into it or not, really should be of a much, much lesser concern. So that's basically the only thing I can say about that.
Amazingly said, amazingly said. Caller, any more questions?
No, that was perfect. Thanks for saying that.
All right.
I actually like Ayn Rand, too.
Excellent.
Good.
Thanks.
You have a great day.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. It was a good one.